Good morning, everybody. How are we doing today? It's Phil, the miniature model maker, with something a little bit different from our normal Gundam content. Today, like I said in the last stream, due to issues with painting supplies and repair supplies, I'm going to be doing a little bit of work on some BattleTech today. And over this weekend, I did a few things. Now, one of the recent techniques, I think I mentioned in the last video, Slap Chop has taken the miniature painting world by storm. It's one of those goofy names that people come up with. It is essentially undercoating a model using a primer of various colors and then dry brushing of other colors on top of that to get more highlights, and then using a speed paint such as contrast paint or express paint or speed paints based off of the brand. So I did a little bit of testing over the weekend doing some dry brushes, plus I got my new artified dry brush set, which was fun to play with. So I did three things. I did this Warhammer with a black primer, it was black style res primer that I brushed on. Normally I use my airbrush, but I didn't feel like getting it out for three three models. A spray can undercoat will do just fine. These BattleTech miniatures details not so fine that you need to worry about a something like Rust-Oleum really clogging the details like you would in an artifact. Just need to make sure that the primer is safe for this plastic, which I don't know. Fortunately, I can't tell you. However, I did a black um, prime, and then I dry brushed two shades of gray on top of that to see if I could get a volumetric um, how adding volume, which is light and dark tinting and hues, shades, um, helps with light and perception of light and brightness and darkness of colors to see if there was any significant impact when using the contrast paints that I have. And I've only got a few colors of them. And mixed results. So this is Militarum group, Militarum green, whatever that one is. This leg here was Gilliman flesh, and that did have some better results because it's a thinner paint. It's more translucent, transparent when it dries. So we were able to see some more of the shading and highlights on that. The Gore Grunt of Fur, not so much. It was a darker and more opaque paint. I love this color though. It's a nice red brown. It looks more yellow on the screen than it is because of my lighting. And the Militarum green is also less yellow in truth than it is on the screen. Both of these two colors worked very well. I was not as pleased with the effect of the flesh as far as the color was concerned, but I was happy to see the effect of the gray undercoating. And then this Marauder, I did the more traditional black undercoat and then gray dry brushing of various things, and then a white on top of it so you can get a better idea of what it looked like here. And this is definitely darker. That's not just shade from lighting. Because of the size of the dry brush, I think I used the size 11 on this. Wasn't able to get into all of the areas, which was pretty cool because that meant if I can't get the brush in there, I couldn't light wouldn't get in there as much. Um, so I just worked the brush around with the grays and up into the white to build a more volumetric, darker shadows up into a brighter highlight with that, which I was pretty pleased with. Was the first time using these more rounded dry brushes and using newer techniques where you keep a little bit more moisture on the brush and don't just brush the dust on it. There was more stippling and more control with it. And with the green and brown, I was pretty pleased, and especially for my first time using contrast paints. They uh, they came through pretty well, and I'll do more painting on this guy today to show you how I did that and maybe work up some ideas for using the contrast paints, the speed paints, because they're a different beast than the traditional acrylic. And then this guy, I like the sketch style. I wanted to try that on mech. So this was again the black base, and then I used multiple blends of gray to kind of up into that. I don't think that was white. That may have been one of the whites. Um, just to get a more cell shaded sketch style undercoat. It looks a lot like a winter camouflage or urban camouflage, but it's was there to see how the gradient between the really brights down into the blacks impacted the color of the paint as well. And I was pretty happy with that for a fairly slapdash, roughshod paint job. The blending wasn't anything particularly fancy. I just stippled and sketched into areas I thought looked kind of neat. And I'll do some more painting on this one as well. And then we had talked about also dry brushing. Recently, people have been talking about doing an undercoat with a speed paint and then doing another highlight and doing another speed paint coat on top of that. Don Serratos, one of my favorite channels out there, is championing that technique, and he is an exceptional painter by any stretch of the imagination, and has been championing that method of what in the past we would have called highlighting and glazing. Excuse me, I'm very coffee today. I may need to go get a little bit of water here shortly. Um, in fact, I'll go do that right now. I'll be back in just a moment. Now let's make sure that I don't put any paint in that water. And I have one visitor. Are we able to chat, visitor? I think I know who you are. If you are able to chat, let me know. If not, send me a message in Discord because I want to make sure people are able to send messages when they come in to visit. So, the first thing we'll start with today will be the dry brush highlighting on this and then painting this a metal color so it can dry and I can do further painting things, and then we'll get on to the other two mechs with the regular um, contrast speed paint there. And I'm going to use, I got the message. I got your message. I said, no worries. So I am actually using, let's pull this here, there. Maybe counterintuitive using a wet palette for dry brushing. The reason being that some moisture on your dry brush, not much, just a little bit, helps to get the paint off the brush better, and it prevents also a lot of that chalky texture that you get from just rubbing it off on a paper towel and then putting it on the model. And I'll show both ways and see how it looks. So we got our texture palette here, my trusty cutting board, and with these more rounded, the newer style dry brush, newer to the miniature world, you dab on the top and work it in on the palette until you're at the point where it's coming off, but not completely. And then I test it here. That's getting the excess off. Now I may have put a little bit too much paint on the brush there for showing. And we look okay. And now we've got our paintbrush. And I'm going to use, in this case, it's Citadel's Morghast Bone, because it's a slightly yellow, light tan, light yellow that I think will work well with the green. So I'm going to gently work my way up like that, and we're going to go down. Can we see there? Here we go. Ooh, this is my first time painting on stream. That's an interesting experience. And normally with a brush like this, you can also do stippling. And how is that showing up? And spinning of the brush. All right, now we're getting to the point where the paint's not coming off the brush as easily as it had, which is where the little moisture pad comes in. Just one little drop of water pop into there, and you work it on there. And this is a new thing for me. I'm putting my life on the line out here on YouTube land, learning how to dry brush like this. If you want to watch the master and work, go watch Artis Opus, ARTISOPIS. Yeah, that's a little bit too much. Byron, the gentleman with that brand, is the one who popularized this technique and has done some very, very high-end work with dry brushing, to the point where if you're uncomfortable with the idea of having an airbrush, or can't really afford an airbrush, or it doesn't work in your workspace, his dry brushing technique is, in my mind, equivalent to most of the most dry brush technique up to, airbrush technique up to the really advanced stuff. He's able to get, I'm not quite able to get some very, very, very smooth blends, get good coverage on um, large flat panels, which traditionally, in my opinion, airbrushes are the best for. Um, okay, that's coming off. Do we need more? Nope, see, I just checked that. There's not much paint left on the brush. So we're gonna grab a little bit more, and the wet palette is keeping the paint more moist. So I could just dab into some of this water here, but I wanted to show that little guy. And let you know that they're a neat tool that comes with it. So this brush set was very affordable for what it comes with. It came with 5, all the way from this teeny tiny little guy up to a big fat one that I have yet to try. I'm going to use this on like tanks and things. That'll be fun to play with. And got the little moisture pad and even a little pad of soap, which was kind of them. There we go. Now that's working really well. And you can see I'm not doing any particular direction. I'm just trying to keep it on the highlights for the moment. And let's show how we can use the wet palette to reinvigorate the paint. Boom, boom. And then just using some nice light strokes to get the highlight. And I'm not going to be putting any of this highlighting down below. This is the second round of highlights, so I'm trying to keep it more to where the light would be directly shining. And now we're going to go in and get a little bit of water on there. And the great thing about this is easy, easy, easy to clean. Just rub it off onto your palette. A proper professional texture palette works better than this. I don't have one of those at the moment. I will probably get one at some point, but for now, this works just fine for me. And now there we go. It's done. Because you're not putting a lot of liquid paint in there, you don't have to worry about it getting into the ferrule. You just gotta wipe it off on there. And because these are new, there are still some hairs that are coming off. I have kind of worked them a bit, but they're still working themselves in. Okay, so we're taking the little teeny tiny guy. And I'm going to go now and stipple. And for those of you not familiar with the technique, stippling is just pushing down. And that's where these brushes really come into their own versus the normal variety. They're robust. And with this, I can really get some decent highlights. I can really, really work it up. Um, this using this dry brush as your main painting method definitely works. Ooh, that's a lot. But it does take time. So you're building up thin thin layers of paint, but you can get some really good blends of colors to the degree that one almost to the degree I'd say that one could with an airbrush if you're patient enough and are willing to give it the time. And it may look like I'm using a whole lot of paint, but really I am not, and hardly wasting any even onto the palette. So I'll tell you, with the normal brushes I use, when I wash them out, I get quite a bit of wastage into the water can. All right, so I'll show you again. Take a little bit of water. I got my water over there. A drop, plop into there. Work it in. And now again, I got too much paint on the brush, so I'm cleaning it off. This is a little tiny guy. If any of you are old enough to remember Brill cream, the hair product, a little dab will do ya. Just a little dab. And we'll get this guy here real quick. I think that's pretty good for the green. So I'll do one little bit more. On here on these legs. This is not the brush I want to be using for this. Let's use the bigger one. Working it in. And then removing excess. And then we're going to stipple. And you can apply more or less pressure depending on your needs. The more pressure you put, the more paint you're going to get on to your surface. But also, the deeper into your darker panels you're going to go, you're in risk losing some of that shading, which is what happened there. So I'm just going to run this over. I love these BattleTech models for a very particular reason. They're not the best sculpts, but they come in one piece and they're really easy to strip. So these big panels, these deep detail lines, and ease of cleaning, stripping, make them perfect test models. Instead of possibly using the little plastic army men from the dollar store that I used to, this is a little bit more practical example. There we go. Yeah, look at that. See how different that is from that side to the front. There we are. So that's in good shape. We'll stop with that there. And do a quick grabby of the cheap number 6 brush for this is Citadel's bolt gunmetal. Gonna do a quick paint of these guns just as an example for something coming. And when you're painting large areas, use the side of the brush. Not just the tip, guys. Not just the tip. It helps you get a nice, even coat. Oh, Lord. Somebody's... Yeah, I thought you would like that little comment. So my current audience is one of my best friends, and it's sending me harassing messages on Discord. I love you, Chris. You're the best. Technically, you were the first commenter on any of my streams, too. All right, how we look there? Oh, my goodness. I wonder how these pro painters are able to do such insane detail painting when they're on camera like this. They must have a different setup. But well, they certainly have a different setup, a better setup than I do. Okay, and we'll try here. But normally when I'm painting, I've got this thing right up close to my face in a very different arrangement so I can see better and my hands are a little bit more steady. But so far so good. It's good enough for tabletop. I wouldn't submit this to Camo Specs Online or any competition by any stretch of the imagination. But I think it will be good enough for our purposes. Okay, so that's taken care of. I'm going to let that dry and come back to it later on. Okay, and the next step, we're going to take our Militarum green and coat on this so we can see how it goes. Now, this is going to be kind of a tongue-in-cheek joke, but I'm serious about it as well. Speed paints were meant to be something for beginners that are very easy, low effort, low technique to get models on a tabletop quickly. And they still have that reputation. However, they are not just a beginner's paint. They're they're a very different beast than the traditional thicker acrylic paints. I found out when I did my test the other day. They're a lot like how I used to do acrylics normally. I got into my painting, my try hard painting phase, if you want to call it, where I was trying to learn details and things back when, well, that would be the late 90s into the 2000s when NMM and really smooth blends and glazing were in fashion. So I traditionally used thinner, I thinned my paints more than people would these days and did the many, many thinner layers just as a matter of course. It's what I was taught with. But these speed paints behave somewhat similarly. They're a little bit more viscous than a thinned out normal layer acrylic. But you paint with them the same way for the most part. One thing you can't do that you can with regular acrylics is screw up. Like if you're intending to have this panel brown and accidentally put green on it, if you can't go back very quickly and remove all that green, you can't really cover that up because the paints are transparent enough that that green is going to show. So you actually need to have a lot of intention when you're using these and not just throwing your brush around. And because of the way they dry, if you go back a little bit too late, like right here, it started to dry. If I went and tried to remove some of that, it would leave a crazy mark. And I'll show you on, I just covered it up on the Warhammer. Um, so you need to know where you're going to put it and how you want it to go, but you also need to use a fair amount of it. It likes to be laid down thick. Of course, you can absolutely glaze with it and use any medium as a tool, and they make excellent glazes or even layers. You can layer these on to get different effects as well. So in my rambly way of saying, speed paints can very much make you a better painter. I know they've made me, even just the past couple of days I've been using them for these testing before doing this, better. I have to be more mindful of where my brush is, where I'm painting, what I'm painting, how much paint is on my brush, and just everything that goes into painting a mini. All right, there you go. So there's There's that arm done. Gonna let that dry and pool. So, we'll do one more. We'll do something else here. For colors. Now, you can see, if you can see, there's a fair bit of paint on this. Way more than I would normally use when painting with a traditional layer acrylic. And I keep going back to make sure that that brush is loaded with paint, because these are self-leveling. So that means that as they sit on the panel, gravity pulls them down. If you have an uneven spot on one part of it, like say I put a bunch here, and then I go through, that will settle down onto its own plane. It's self-leveling. But you got to make sure that you continue to work one small area at a time while it's wet. Wet on wet. Work wet on wet. Make sure you finish that one spot before moving on to the next. So here we've got this panel. And unfortunately, my paint handles don't like to play nicely with these hex bases. Okay. Let's take this panel right here. Just load it up with some fresh paint. And I really laid that down thick. I've still got enough paint on the brush. I go and do that one. And now I can even sop up a little bit of that. There. Spread it up here. Oh, we may hear some sounds. There's a guy coming to fix something on my house. We had a little bit of, yep, bonk, bonk. Had a bit of external damage. That needed to be put back up front. Because our homeowners associations, HOAs, God bless them, sometimes they do good things, other times they want to make sure that you're keeping up with the appearance of everybody, which is true. I live in a townhome complex. I hate doing yard work, so having the HOA, they actually do a lot for us. I joke about it. They're all good people, and they make sure that people come and do external repairs with my dues that I don't have to. So, woohoo! All right, did we see that? Let's try one more. Let's do the rest of this body. So again, loaded up the brush. I'm not using a little bit of paint. I'm not being sparing with it at all. I'm going over all of it and really coating it because of all these lovely detail cracks. That paint just automatically, like I said, levels down, self-levels, fills in those cracks. It makes a nice flat surface. Okay, so that's there with the sketch undercoating, the snow camo. Now, if you want to, and you're so inclined and you're interested in the techniques of painting and aren't aren't trying to get a bunch of these guys out on the table, you could do a whole lot of experimentation. You could thin these speed paints down with the appropriate medium, um, and get more of a glaze and do more intricate blending on your undercoat and absolutely achieve some fantastic results with it if you want. And I think in the future, I probably will because I'd like to try doing that. Okay, so now here's our marauder. Let's work on the arm. It's going to be easier to get to. Okay, so I've loaded up my brush, and looking here, I've got the green on the upper panels. So I just take it one panel at a time. And in this case, I'm just letting the paint flow off the brush. Way too much. Soak it up and put it on the next panel. And as long as you keep, there we are. As long as you're not putting your brush on half dried paint and it's still moist, you can work some off and then soak up some of the excess. This is definitely not Slaneshi. Slanesh likes excess. We don't want the excess here. And coat it. Now I'm going to come back, get some more while this is still wet, and give that a proper coat. Here. So if I were to make a BattleTech force, what colors should I use? Purple is not allowed. That's the Chaos Space Marine. Oh, let me know. What do you think? It's gonna be a while. So we've got time for comments to show up on the video. Oh my goodness, you can probably hear that. All right, and the last panel we're going to do is this here. And you know, the more I work with these, the more I like them. Ah, perfect example. Okay, right here. I accidentally splooged some of that brown paint from this section onto this panel when I was painting. So it's going to show differently. That brown is going to show up underneath the green. I'm sorry for the noise, people. They're drilling for oil in my house. They're reattaching some siding. Um, and we'll do these as well. These legs. But getting to the idea of the paint you accidentally put underneath influencing the color of what's above it. If you're not trying to do it, then yeah, that's a problem. However, it does open the door for some very interesting painting techniques. You can use colored undercoating, right there, instead of your plain grayscale to change the color of the main coat in various ways. Just was watching a video earlier where Juan, again, I'll recommend him, Juan Hidalgo, funny guy, was doing a green Space Marine, and he did a first contrast paint. No, he was using the Vallejo Express paints um, of a purple underneath with because purple and green being contrasting or complementary colors. Um, it influenced how the shading looked, which is kind of neat. And I've seen people doing the same thing with orcs using a um, purple base coat in the under areas to give a nice shade that has a richer shadow rather than just darkening the same color. It brought out new new colors of the green underneath. So there's a whole world of experimentation and learning and using a tool, a paint for its properties, all of the properties, um, in whatever different way you can to achieve effects that you want to achieve, regardless of whether it's a quote unquote noob paint or not. So I can see layering these in different ways being a really good way to achieve shadows and depth in there. Now, why am I not just throwing it in here? Because I want to try something different. I'm going to put a different panel liner in there. These are test models right now. They're nothing that's going to be permanent. I know people say keep your first mini, and I might, but if I do that, I'll probably strip this guy and do the best job I can. So I have a legit example of me at my best at that point in time. Instead of talking and painting and not fully paying attention to any one thing that's going on. At that time. Wow, that's already been 48 minutes. What the heck? Time's fun when you're having flies. So we're going to stop there with these 3 mechs and let this paint dry so maybe we can see a bit how that's working. And man, I am, even just this little bit, I am a big fan of speed paints on these BattleTech minis. They are they're just fantastic for these deep cracks and all this strong detail. And the best thing is most battle mechs aren't really intricate designs. Okay, so we are going to do one more thing. This has almost dried. let's see what happens when I put some of this green on top of the highlight coat. Now, if you hear some rattling um, when I shake my paints, is because I generally have a tendency to paint for like 3 months and then stop for a year, uh, and the paints settle. So I put agitators in there, and they're my little balls of steel. Okay, big long coat. We're really gonna hit this one. Here we are. So we're gonna all do two different sides to this guy. Give it a good thick coat over here on this right side of it to see how that works. And then on the other side, the left side, we'll do something slightly different. We'll do a lighter coat overall, a thinner coat, and then come back and use the same paint as yet another layer to shade and intentionally darken certain areas while leaving others lighter. The thing that we traditionally would use a shade like Nuln Oil for. But because these paints have that thinner texture to them and they're more translucent, we can use that property to our advantage. So I am making sure, even though I'm using less paint, to make sure that there's always paint on the brush. I'm just using amounts that coat and I'm lightly hitting the surface of the model instead of really slapping it on. All right, so there are those two. This heavy and this light, I'm going to go in and soak up some of this excess here. Sorry, Slanesh. There we go. All right, that's done, and we're going to see in a later video how that worked. But I do want to do one thing on here before I go. We had talked in past videos about streaking grime, and I've got a couple different kinds here, and I understand there are concerns about AK Interactive out there on the internet. I got these years ago. I have them. I'm going to use them. I'm not going to throw away brand new paints that I spent good money on just to not upset somebody That doesn't mean, though, I'm going to buy them again. All right, so these, again, are enamels. They are thinned with an organic solvent. In this case, mineral spirits, white spirits. Don't lick your brush. Use an old brush. It's not something you want to be getting in your mouth. It'll be gross. Water, not so much. So I've got some alcohol here. I will clean the brush with the alcohol. But we've got a little bit of it right here. And I'm going to grab this brush here. And pull up some of the grime and put it over the metal. And there we are there, instant grimification. And we'll also put a little bit here on the front and center of this guy. Now this is a fairly light application. If I were trying to use it to weather and maybe get down in the panels, I would be using more. And in later, as you'll see when I remove it, I would be using mineral spirits to remove. However, I don't have mineral spirits, so I'm not going to do that. We're going to just remove it with a Q-tip. And there we are. I suppose I could try alcohol. 70% isopropyl. That might work. Sorry for knocking the camera there. It's not, alcohol is not as good of an organic solvent for some of these paints. It is an organic solvent, guarantee you that. It's just not quite as good as mineral spirits, white spirits, as for our needs. There we are. Okay. But it's certainly better than the soap and oil I used to clean these other brushes earlier. Okay. I'll do one more pass here. Clean this one out. Yeah, maybe I just... We're okay. All right. So let's see what we have here. That's probably too light to see on my camera. So we're gonna go ham. And this one is the regular streaking grime for all vehicles. There's, I mean, I got this 2 years ago, so it's probably already changed. But they're various different flavors of streaking grime on that brand. There's a dark green, there's a regular green, there's a rust, and I'll actually use some of the rust on this in just a moment. All right, so there we go. We really just threw down some of that. That's a pretty hefty amount. I wish I remembered more of my organic chemistry. So then I could talk a little bit more about how alcohol and enamels and mineral spirits and all that interact. But I can't. You want to go talk to Brent to Goobertown Hobbies. He is your PhD chemist, from what I understand. All right. So that was the regular streaking grime. And it, rather than having a brown coat, it actually has kind of a greenish brown, which was upsetting. I had wanted it to be brown when I first got it. Rust streaks. Let's give that a go. First time ever unboxing of this. Ooh, do I want to use it? Yeah, I will use it on this guy. Okay. Now, typically, my understanding is this: with you would dab a little tiny bit and then streak it down. Yes, we're talking streaking, Chris. Tee hee hee, ha ha ha. Um, like on a naval vessel, you would have points on the deck where you would get rust up top, and then the water dragging it down um, stains the metal underneath it. And we're going to try that with the alcohol, but we're also just going to cover all of it because I'm curious. Curiosity killed the mech. It's got a nice nice warm color. It's rust, of course it does. Okay, so there, up that part. Now put that away. I know you're behaving. Don't want to get me in trouble on stream. All right. There we are. So that's that. That's been applied. That's starting to dry off a bit. So we're going to, what are we going to do? We're going to take a little bit of the alcohol and gently remove. Okay. So I can confirm that currently it is behaving as expected prior to fully drying using the alcohol. But now we need to let it, well, here we go. So in the Gundam build videos, I mentioned the reductive technique. And that's what I'm doing right here. I've coated the surface with the, the streaking grime, and now I'm selectively removing it to get an effect that I want. So in this area here, it's still staining it, but if I keep gently, gently dabbing and using the alcohol, preferably mineral spirits, you'll remove the majority of the streaking grime and leave your green underneath with some tinting and then the grime itself pooling in the crevices to get some nice shade. And the great thing about these guys, like you can be as heavy-handed with the removal or as light as you would like. And the mineral spirits, at least, I can't confirm. I'm not going to confirm. I'm not going to say the alcohol is working. Um, but it reactivates the the paint after it's done. Normally, I would do this with a Q-tip, but I've got the old enamel brush here, so I figured I might as well use it. All right, so we've got this nice and wet. Let's go ahead and dry that brush out a bit and start just tapping. Someone gently rapping at my chamber door. All right, and we'll leave that. Let that go and see how that does. And then two last. Hit this leg with that. Ooh. Okay, so something else to remember. Don't do what I did. Well, you want to make sure that your contrast paint or any acrylic paint underneath is dry. Otherwise, you are going to remove it. Most hobby branded acrylics, your Citadels, your Army Painters, your Pro Acryls, once they're dry, they are safe to use mineral spirits and enamels on. I have not had an issue ever with using this technique, removing the acrylic paint underneath. The only time that's happened is if I have been too harsh with either the brush or the Q-tip in removing the effect paint. And I have physically abraded the paint off of the surface. Okay, so that is that. We will let that sit overnight and we'll see how that goes. Good gracious, this is a whole lot more yellow on this screen than it is in real life. This is this is more tank M1 green. But thank you for watching today's video. So let's go over what we talked about today. So we had first talked about dry brushing and undercoating our miniatures with the intention of using a speed paint, doing a sketch style undercoat, going from black to gray to white, a full grayscale gradient, intentionally hitting spaces to lighten or darken, provide color gradients, shade gradient, with the express intent of changing how the contrast paint over it would look, going more for a comic book or anime style, sketch style. We had this mech with a black undercoat and then going all the way up to a white with a gray and then white on that to see how it compared to a mech that was primed black and only had gray undercoat. And that's the difference here. And we mentioned how speed paints have different viscosities and how they have different transparencies that influence how much of that undercoat shows through. So, for example, this Militarum green and this Core Grunt of Fur are more opaque than the Gilliman flesh. So the effort put into making a grayscale undercoat, a value undercoat, uh, wasn't, I don't want to say wasted. It had some effect up close, but it wasn't noticeable from any distance. However, the Gilliman flesh, because it is more transparent and it is a lighter brown, did show more of the results of having the black into the gray uh, grayscale there. That has potential for how you use these speed paints. And I also went through and did a second dry brush highlight using a yellow color to see how that affects the green paint, second coat of green paint on top of that. This one, a heavier, more what you might call a base coat green. And then this side, using a lighter coat with the intention of then later going to take that same green and go through and apply another coat in specific areas to create more shadow effect. And then lastly, I went and did some streaking grime and rust effects, talked briefly about the reductive technique and how they are used. And I just want to see how those worked on this. So that is that. Thank you again for watching. I have been Phil, the miniature model maker. And remember, this is a hobby. If it doesn't spark joy, don't do it. Bye bye.